Yes, hello, this is Dr. Lemmon, and I'm doing an introductory talk for my April blog. I got to look what month it is uh, for my April blog. Uh, so in April, I start talking. We've been talking about range, and the whole concept is that when you start to open up new ranges, why you start to make choices and set it up so you get it updated. Old ranges are redundant and habitual, and trying to change something in old range is really very tough. Let me give you a practical example real quick. If I live in a community here for 8 years, I've got a dry cleaners I go to, I got a barber shop I go to, I've got a doctor I go to, I've got a dentist I go to. Everything is kind of fixed in the community. It's all related. I've got certain neighbors that will talk to me. I've got other neighbors that will talk to me. All of that is all part of the community piece. If I all of a sudden move to a different state, a different country, to who knows where, all of that I then have to reassemble. In the reassembling, I'm going to evaluate. It's time to evaluate. So when I get someplace new, I'm going to look around the dry cleaners that are closed. I'm going to try one. If it doesn't do a good job, I'm going to go to another one. I'm going to reevaluate. That gives me an opportunity to upgrade my standard. How many times have you grown up in an area and you used to eat at a certain restaurant? It was really good. And you remember with your family, and then you move away, go to college or get a job or get married or whatever. And then you come back and you go back to the restaurant. And you go, oh my gosh, this place is horrible. And I can't believe we used to eat here all the time. I like this. This is disgusting. You know, it's like, I wouldn't come here. See, you have changed the nature of your potential within a range by developing new ranges. Now, the old standards are no longer a standard. Everything is updated. Why is update necessary? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but there's a guy named Bob May. I think now today he's Lord May. I think he's like a science advisor for the UK, but nonetheless, he was a mathematician, and at the time he was not getting anywhere with his math problems he was working on, and he was trying to find something to play with. And there was a lot of interest in, like, what's it take to preserve a herd, right? This is a few years back. What does it take to preserve a rhino or a certain type of cat or a gorillas or certain monkeys? How many numbers would you need to have a herd of them, a tribe of them, a group of them that could sustain, right? And so he worked out some math and he came up with some numbers. And so it was really, once he figured it all out, it was really pretty simple. He looked at the patterns, he got the information, he worked the math. And then as you started working it, people said, well, what happens if we increase? If we need X amount of gorillas to maintain this, right? So gorillas, for example, run in patterns, right? So you have in a group of gorillas, males and females, what we start to know is that women bring in a gene pool certain characteristics that are sustainable in bodies. In other words, consistency, myelin sheaths, things like that, that actually come from females, all in the female DNA piece. There are pieces in that dynamic in the female that make this piece operate. Right? And then the male comes in and he offers things that has diversity, like gender change, certain characteristics, size, so on and so forth. So the two bring not just a mixture of DNA, but they bring up a range as long as well as a mixture. So that's why a lot of animal species, like gorillas, not all, some made up, some don't, but nonetheless, like them, they'll have one male that'll be the male, and he'll have all the females. And so that makes sense because they pick a male who has size, dimension, strength, characteristics that they want. And then the females come in and they bring a range of characteristics. So the whole thing is a good system. And then they have extra males sitting there because when he falters, one of them is going to kill him and take over. But the other side of it, they're good for babysitting, they're good for policing the area, they're good for protection. So it's nice to have a community or a tribe, right? What May found out is when you start to put the numbers up, at some point, when you start to add one more gorilla, at some point, mathematically, you go into chaos, just totally chaotic. So that's like if you've got too many females, all of a sudden one male can't accommodate all that. So it's like, oh my goodness. So now they need to have two males. Well, at that point, the two males are used to fighting over who knows what. And so now you have two tribes and they split. Well, as we're growing, we're trying to get out of being a tribal group of people fighting with each other forever. We did that for a long time. And we started to develop into communities that were much larger. We used to be, 20 people in a group, then 40 people in a group. Then we got up to about 70, and that was kind of the max. Even at Facebook and stuff, it's like the average person doesn't have really more than X amount. You can look all the stats. It's really kind of interesting. Our tribal nature shows up in there. We need to move forward. We need to be able to go to a larger piece, but we don't want to go chaotic, because when we get to chaos, we get deterministic chaos and non-deterministic chaos, and an outcome's not good for some people and good for others. And we already start to see that in wealth gaps and so on and so forth, right? So we're already moving in that direction of a chaotic system that's going to all collapse. So when we see those come into nature, it's like, wow, we are slowly building the dynamics of becoming a global people, the people of Earth. That's kind of the gauge goal, right? So we were moving in that direction and we were starting to unite a little bit. And then of course, some of the cycles started to drop because they run cycles, they run patterns, they run ranges, all that stuff is on. Our attention is on ranges, but all the rest exists. So what happens is that all of a sudden now we're backing down to, for some of us that are all polarized and arguing a certain view and not accepting anything else, we would call them tribal, or we would say the next step up from tribal, the next uniting piece was finding a common ground, which then became religious, right? So now we have religious arguments and wars, right? We saw, my goodness, over the last few years, we've also had all those polarized pieces. A certain viewpoint is right and everyone else is wrong. And then there's a few people sitting in the middle that says, how do we unite? How do we bring this all together? Because if we become just nation states, then it's just going to be big tribes who want to fight with other big tribes over concepts and ideology. We don't all think the same. We think in groups of patterns based on cultures, based on tribes that grew out of those. That's just all statistical facts. And so you're never going to get an Asian person to think like an American person. It shouldn't be that way. And you're never going to get a Soviet person to think like an American person. It's not going to be that way. So we need to respect all those different views, all those different protocols, all those different procedures. And we need to find a term of agreement that allows that to exist. To make that happen in a human piece that is so inherently driven by a pattern and a range, and getting them to change is almost an impossibility statistically. So the only way we can play into that is to open up new ranges so we can learn new skill sets. We reach a threshold point. So evolution comes along, and evolution is the thing that starts to bring changes in, right? So tribal people at one time thought maybe the volcano was God because it had huge amount of power and it could destroy people. So what else is stronger than it? It must be God. All right, really ancient. Pretty soon we got away from that. We no longer think of that as God. We just think of that as a piece of nature. We can run a math around it. We can figure out where it's at. We're not able to manage it very well, but we've got some information on it. Statistically, it's not the most correct thing in the world, but at least we can have a conversation about it, right? And we no longer think of that as God. And then we started thinking of something else as God. And then we started thinking, oh, something else is. And now we're getting to the point where we're starting to get into all kinds of concepts and ideas, all of which seems to be more pattern driven than it is supreme given. It's like, so we're losing the idea of an absolute truth, an absolute formula, an absolute consistency, absolutely one thing fixes all. We look at a universe and we say, we've got a lot of information about this is amazing, but we really have a lot of information and a little bit of certainty about 5% of our universe. The other 95%, we have no clue what goes on, none at all. And the stuff that we have works really, really good when we model it down. But at some point in time, if we put the numbers in getting larger, it goes chaotic. And then all bets are off. So we need to have an evolutionary system that comes along that allows this whole thing to separate out so that we can then expand it up, get rid of the peripheral stuff that really wasn't important in the first place. It's just going to, as it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, we can look at that and say, I don't know why I was saving that. I'll just throw it away, right? I found this and I thought this was really cool. It's probably a jawbone from a burrow or something right in the desert. And it's been laying around here for 4 or 5 years. I don't know why I haven't thrown it away because it's totally useless to me. I don't know why I didn't live in the desert. I thought it'd be kind of cool. It's a conversation piece. It's whatever, but it never wound up being anything. That happens to a lot of our stuff, right? So if anything, I've got a habit of picking up something that gets my attention. But most of it is pretty useless. And most of it winds up going in the trash, right? It's just, isn't that the nature of humans, right? We pick up brochures, we pick up things, we pick up ads, we sign up for stuff, and then we've got to find a way to unsign up for it because we decided we really don't want that, right? That's just our nature. So as we start to open up new ideas, new avenues, we expand out. So this is our focus. And so each month I throw little bits and pieces of data that starts to support that. If we didn't do that, if we just went with our package and pushed it to the limit, at some point it's just going to go chaotic. And then we have World War III or some other chaotic symptoms. So who knows how many volcanoes will go off as the planet warms up. You guys get the fact that we're a planet that's a ball of molten hot stuff in the center. The surface cooled down thanks to something called water, right? And so that ocean keeps the core cooled down, right? And if the planet warms up, the ocean warms up, we reach a threshold where that can go chaotic. At that point, we have volcanoes, we have storms, we have who knows what. So we can see the math in that. So now we're saying, wow, do we have to be responsible for all this other stuff that we didn't have to worry about when we were tribal people? We just went out and hunt, ate, and slept. That's it. Well, if we're going to be a global people, we're probably going to have to pay attention to that. We're probably going to have to manage extremes. We're probably going to have to negotiate some type of structure. That's how we got to be nation states, right? And so we have to get over having all of it be one way and having different nation states be separate, but come in together on discussions with common grounds. That's what we're working towards, perhaps, right? My story. Don't get lost in my bias. So I don't know for sure. That's what I'm looking at. That's my story, right? Not your story, maybe, or maybe it is. As we move in that direction or in whatever direction we're moving, this support structure comes in. Right now, we're at a place, if we want to engage in this and move forward, we're going to need to be able to make this all a reality for us. We're going to have to do something. It's not in a hurry. Evolution is willing to wait 100 years for you to die. If you're resisting it, it doesn't mind. 100 years from now, it'll just happen. So how long are you going to resist it? I'm advocating that you do something to join in so that we can get this expedited and move forward. We do not need more conflict. So we're going to have to, deal with conflict until we can be done with conflict. And so many people, the way that they decide to deal with conflict was to make it one way. We all paint it one way. But, we tried that. It's like, is one race, is one idea, is one philosophy, is any of that universal? Is it any of that makes it profoundly unique? Did we ever come up with anything that didn't have some risk involved, some danger involved, some bias involved, right? We have come up with marvels, but then when we look at them real close, some of those marvels are really very dangerous. And so they push the threshold of balance and they offset other balances. really, really tough when you don't know what's coming to find a balance point. That's why we're not working with balance way off our pay scale. We're working with ranges, and small ranges we can start to get disciplined in. We can play in and have fun with that. And at some point in time, a threshold reaches where 20 new ranges will start to influence all the old ranges, because all of a sudden, this device up here starts to pair things up, compare things, put things together and pattern them out. That's what it's designed to do. It keeps you alive and healthy. And it's trying to put that all together. Give it a chance to do what it's meant to do. Build those ranges. Okay, so this is what we're looking moving forward, and that's have fun with the April blog. If you have any questions, send your questions to chris@wizardscatch.com, right? So that's Chris with 2 S's, and Wizards Catch is WIZARDSCACHE, right? It's just most certainly the YouTube channel is called Wizards Catch. I made it kind of uniform so you won't get lost. The only way to get hold of me is to email me a question. I'll most certainly be glad to answer your question. If it's a good question and meaningful to a large group of people, I'll probably put up a YouTube video on it. So thank you very much and enjoy the blog, and we'll see you next month.